All right, welcome to the Ravit Show. I am super excited because I have the full gang here. We've been talking a lot about generative AI, about implementation of generative AI, and today I have Monica, Chris Foster, Ira Watt. Welcome to the Ravit Show. We're wearing all the data glasses, and we'll be talking a lot about not only data but generative AI and much more. So feel free to bring in your questions. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Hi.
Awesome. So yeah, we can put down our data glasses.
I can't. I'm totally blind with sunglasses on. So I need my real glasses.
Yeah. I know this gets too much, but thanks for doing this. Super excited for today's chat for sure. I know backstage we were talking a lot about it, but would love to, obviously start with your introductions and let the audience learn a little about you. Monica, why not start with you?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Monica Cisneros. I am the product manager for AI and ML at Alteryx. I have the best job in the world, especially because I started this 5 years ago. I'm like, hey, AI is the thing, ML, let's go for it. Now it's like, even my mom just texts me and she's like, hey, have you heard about this like AI thing? And I'm like, Mom, I've been talking about it for like a while. So I'm like,
wow.
Super excited to, now we have everybody talking about AI and it's one of my favorite topics. So super excited to be here.
Awesome. Chris?
Yeah, Chris Foster. I am the CTO in the analytics practice at Converge. So yeah, I've been doing this forever. I've kind of had every little role in data and analytics. To me, this is like it. We did the boring, nerdy stuff for a long time, and now everybody's interested in what we're doing and building. So the tables have turned. It's a fun time to be in analytics.
Yeah, for sure. Very interesting times, and definitely with in the last 7 to 8 months, we've seen the ball game changing completely.
Wow.
We'll talk a lot about it in the episode. Ira?
Hey, yeah, I'm Ira Watt. I'm an Alteryx ace and people insights manager at Fidelity International. My background is in consulting primarily. I've worked with a few big retail clients across EMEA, implementing all sorts of fun and exciting data analytics and data science solutions, be that in different technologies like Alteryx, Power BI, Data Robot, Snowflake. It's all been very exciting.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Thanks for sharing the background, Ira. Just for our audience, because I see a lot of Alteryx in there, hashtag Alteryx. That's one of the reasons because we are doing a very cool giveaway, and that's an iPhone. So those who kind of type in, and we all have something to do with Alteryx. So that's why we decided to take hashtag Alteryx as for the winner. So feel free to type in and obviously register for the event. So we'll be announcing the winner. But to start with, Monica, I know you just mentioned about it. Definitely, you've been talking about AI, ML since a while now. But obviously, data and analytics, role in driving insights and making decisions in various industries kind of play a very important role. And how do you see AI, particularly, generative AI enhancing the capabilities of data and analytics, enabling organizations to extract more from their data? What are your thoughts there?
So generative AI, I mean, the natural language processing has been a theme for a while. So a lot of our customers are already, using text and unstructured data to get insights, to understand more about their businesses and whatnot. Now, in the past few months, generative AI taking the popularity that it has basically transformed, taking the world by storm, right? And now, because of all that awareness, people are, thinking outside of the box. How can I use generative AI to, do this, do that? So ways that I see generative AI, really taking analytics specifically to the next level is, it's faster, understanding the data, making it understandable in terms of like the language, before people would have to have at least some kind of knowledge as to how to make interpretations out of the data. Now with natural language, it becomes very accessible for people. One of the really interesting things that we were talking backstage was the usage of synthetic data, right? And Chris is going to talk a little bit more about this, right? But this is something that is very important, especially when you're talking about training models, when we're talking about like testing and like experimenting, using data that is not necessarily real, that is basically created out of generative AI, which is something that has always been something a little bit difficult to do day-to-day basis. But now, people who are getting into data analytics, like for example, analysts, are able to leverage that synthetic data, and they're able to, play with it, experiment, try to learn about more of analytics, doing with that. And there's a lot more things that we can do, especially when we apply it to use cases in real life. Having things like, for example, personalized insights and recommendations that are understandable in that natural language. We can create report generation. Here at Alteryx, we just magic documents within Auto Insights, and that's like a PowerPoint and an email already ready to do. So that is something that, for example, analysts would have to go back and understand the data behind it, basically translate that into how to communicate that in human language, in English or whatever language that you're speaking, and then frame that in a business context as well, right? In a PowerPoint, when you are looking at the audience, for example, the way that you present the data to your team versus like a C-level person is completely different, because the context matters and the way that we communicate that the analytics matters. So having context dependent change and representation of the data in PowerPoints and emails, and having that done automatically for you, is a complete game changer, right? Instead of like, oh my God, what am I going to write? Am I doing this right? Whatnot? Now you just like click a button, it's already there, and then you revise it, because that is a super important thing that we have to keep in consideration talking about generative AI, is like always the human in the loop. Revise it and then send it over, right? Making sure that everything's correct.
Wow, these are very interesting points, and with the synthetic data, definitely it becomes more interesting. And there's a question as well from, I see it as a LinkedIn user. I'll pick that up for you, Monica. But before that, obviously, I would want to jump on to Chris. And Chris mentioned as well, like in the last few years, they've been working a lot around in the data and analytics space, and just in like last 8 months or 10 months, the game has changed completely. So, Chris, how has Converge integrated generative AI into its business operations, and what specific applications or use cases have proven most successful, in your opinion, or is it too early to say it's already successful?
No, it's already successful. I think, what we do, so at Converge, we are helping, we've got 4,000 clients around the globe. So what we're trying to do is take, these commercially available products or models or offerings, whether it's a proprietary, a chat GPT, or it's something that's open sourced. I don't know if you guys saw, but Meta open sourced Llama yesterday, which is a massive move, and we can talk about that. But our job is to take all these tools and make them actually work for some sort of business application, right? And so, I think the most natural places to start are what AI does best with big compute. It's looking for patterns. It's doing summarizations. It's search. So searching through documents, things that humans would have had to do, right? So to me, the use cases that are standing out in industrial companies are embracing this in a massive way, through the concept of digital twins. I don't know if you guys deal with a lot of digital twin technology, but doing destructive or non-destructive testing or operational testing on big physical assets like dams or turbines, that's expensive. And so being able to make a digital representation of a physical piece of machinery and do your testing digitally, that two things, you're saving a lot of time. So you're compressing the testing window. It's not that you do less testing, but maybe you do more of it. You can get more testing cycles in, but also saves time and money and capital, right? And so it's been a big game changer, even in industry, industrial sector, where they've been slow historically to adapt new technologies. Most of the time when we're talking about data and AI, it's like web native companies or apps or cloud vendors, right? So it's really interesting to see this go mainstream.
Yeah, I think 100%. Those are pretty interesting points that you shared, and obviously with a lot of open source models out there, it kind of also helps a lot of businesses to understand the game pretty well. So that's right. Quick one for Ira as well. Ira, I know for a fact where obviously you've been doing a lot at Fidelity International as well, and a little different question in terms of what type of challenges do you see while integrating or implementing generative AI at Fidelity International internally or even for the customers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's quite a few potential risks involved with generative AI. I mean, we've already seen, I think there was a case whereby client data was leaked, or at least ChatGPT started to regurgitate stuff that was confidential. So I think once those kind of regulations are in place, that risk might be reduced. And there's also, of course, the risk that you're putting a lot of trust potentially into something which isn't human. It's bound to have its quirks. So I think as long as there's thorough testing, I think it's a bit like self-driving cars. At no point is this going to be a perfect thing, but so long as it's better than a human doing it, then I suppose it's something that we can work with and use and implement. Yeah, I'll be interested to hear what the rest of the group thinks on that one, actually, as well.
Yeah, for sure. Any Chris, any thoughts around the challenges that you kind of see while implementing a generative AI?
Yeah, I mean, just generally, it's a totally different way of thinking about AI, right? AI used to be, I'll call it like hidden. It was like, powered by AI. It used to be hidden behind something like an app on your phone. And that app was just like a translation layer for a specific function, like, Uber Eats recommending you something to eat, or Maps optimizing a route depending on where you're trying to go. And that was a really controlled interaction between, a person and a machine. And now, these tools these models are so abstracted that anyone has access. So now we need to consider how the general public is going to interface with these models without the boundary of an app. And so, there's this whole new domain called designing for AI. And this is a really intentional design thinking pattern where we think about the intent of what we're building, all the data and policies around it, how the machine learning algorithms are going to be trained, what kind of data we're going to give them. And then how should it reason? How should it express the results of that model back to a human? How's that human going to interpret it? And then how do we give feedback into the model so it gets better and better over time, right? So this whole way of thinking and designing for human machine interaction is a challenge. And I don't think most organizations have thought that through.
I mean, just to add on to my previous point, it's also a big thing you have to think about, as well as with normal AI, or like standard machine learning. You have to think about, is your data set biased potentially? And often the case, it is biased, or if it's not biased, in the future, it might become biased. So you have to kind of build this kind of framework around deploying machine learning or generative AI solutions, whereby you're constantly monitoring the data you're feeding it. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of infrastructure you need to build around these sort of platforms before you roll it out to a client.
Oh yeah. Biased. It can be offensive. It can be misleading and hallucinate. These are darker. Yeah, these are darker black boxes than we've ever built. Right? There's cyber threats. There's privacy breaches, like you're talking about. If did we train that model? Is it built on theft? Like, did we steal the IP that was used to train that model? Are we inadvertently sharing our own intellectual property? So there's so many things you need to focus on, right down from cybersecurity to teaching stakeholders how to actually oversee these things, monitoring third parties who are using our models through an API or our vendor partners. So it opens up a whole new set of considerations.
Wow, I love these points, and thanks for sharing those, Ira, Chris. Quick question here for Monica. Let's take this one. Sorry, I don't know the name. I'll check that out. But for Monica, you said about synthetic data. So which do you think is more popular or necessary for the real-time use cases when you see between structured and unstructured synthetic data? Interesting.
I love this question. So I used to really focus on real-time data. That was basically my previous job. And we love synthetic data in real-time use cases, especially, as Chris was talking about, when you're talking about digital twins, synthetic data is all the rage. It's fantastic. I do think now, synthetic data kind of really started in that sort of niche in terms of like real time. However, nowadays is everything, right? It has become kind of like a new normal in terms of like how we deal with data, precisely because of all the considerations that we're talking about. Right now, we not only are there more regulations and legislation around data, but then there's also considerations that we're trying to hold ourselves into a higher standard of how we're dealing with that data, right? So like there's the legal implications, regulation, government, but then there's also the ethical implications of it. So that's where we're, going higher. Now, synthetic data, what allows us is to basically kind of like a loophole, right? Because we're not dealing with real data. We're not dealing with people's names. We're not dealing with their birthdays. We're not dealing with personal information or, IP. This is data that, basically we are creating in order for us to test and create and refine and optimize all these models that we're dealing. Now, there's a whole other stream coming into unstructured data, right? When we're talking about generating images with AI. So that is like a whole other new piece that is coming along. Now, when you take it to the other side and you implement that synthetic data and, you're going to like deep fakes, that is a whole other realm within the realm of ethics within AI that have to be taken in consideration. So basically, to answer in a nutshell, is that it's the bread and butter within real-time use cases, but now we are expanding so much more than that.
Yeah, I think fantastic points there. Very important aspects that you kind of touched on, Monica. So thanks for that. Good question for sure. Another question here from our audience that I wanted to pick is for Ira. So Ira, what is your take on generative AI implementation, which you already explained about, but how does it improve the business, and any interesting user story that you would like to share? Interesting.
Yeah, sure. So as we kind of alluded to before, this is quite a new field, and in terms of implementing that with financial data and people's money, there's a lot of regulation and risk that needs to be managed. But I do have a few fun use cases that I can discuss. So, for instance, Fidelity has a Fidelity Cares kind of program. It's like a charity kind of organization that they run. And one of the use cases they were looking at is essentially the aim of this project is to kind of give, for instance, audiobooks to children who don't have access to potentially hard copy editions of all these books, and also implement these kind of audiobooks in their own language, because very often audiobooks are in English. And it's actually surprising the number of books which are actually available on audio. I think it was something that like 90% of the stories just aren't available to people. So one of the solutions that they were looking at in our generative AI group is essentially generating these stories using generative AI, creating kind of a voice to the story. And obviously a generated voice is a lot more dynamic than your standard text to speech. So I thought that was a good, fun use case that they were discussing. And of course, on the finance side, there's all sorts of fun and crazy things like FinGPT, which is really hard to say. As you can imagine, all it does is it takes all the kind of news stories finance data from Bloomberg, Yahoo, all that, mashes it together, and you can do all sorts of stuff like creating ESG scores, or essentially planning a whole portfolio or fund around this analysis produced by the bot. And yeah, you're hearing stories all the time about how these bots are outperforming real life managed funds. I imagine there's quite a bit of hyperbole about that at the moment, but it's definitely something to keep a track of going forward. I certainly at the moment would not trust my money with these bots, but that's definitely something to keep a track of.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've read of news, obviously, where people kind of have lost a lot of money through, obviously investing and learning from the bots, even if it's about the trading, and having those AI softwares and apps where they have started telling you where you can actually buy, when to buy a stock or when to sell, but it's still not out there. So obviously there's a huge gap in terms of the education as well, where people have started obviously trusting AI very quickly, because it's a machine that they're talking to and they're getting the answers, but no one knows the accuracy to that level. So yeah. All right. One quick question here that I saw from Anne from YouTube. So this is for you, Chris. What is it about digital twinning that's notably new and different from the now long established industrial practice of industrial processes, computer design, modeling, and monitoring? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think great question, because it just like anything here, it's not new. None of what we're doing is new. It's just that we've got so much computing power at our fingertips now, and so a lot of industrial modeling and CAD modeling that was done by engineers or by reliability engineers to make sure that pieces of equipment didn't fail. Now a lot of that isn't a manual, isn't a human process, right? A lot of these algorithms and models can do the initial calculations or do the initial modeling for you, and then a human can just tweak or interpret what has been done. So it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Also, we may have been able to work with 400 parameters or 500 parameters before, and now we can work with a trillion parameters. So testing all of these different scenarios and combinations of real world scenarios down to weather and pressure, all of the things that a human engineer would have had to think of, we can now look at historical data based on those pieces of equipment and predict or generate what should be done. I was just seeing that, I don't know if you guys read this, but somebody asked one of these models, I forget which one it was, to design a CPU, and I think it took about 5 hours. And so, imagine how long it would take even a computer science PhD to go and design. All the information is out there on how to do it, right? You could look at old IBM architecture and Intel research, and eventually you and I, we could design our own CPU. I guarantee it. Probably over the course of the next 80 years, or that's what it would take me. But it did it in 5 hours, right? And so, these long established practices are still very valid. We can just compress all the timelines now. And instead of doing 1 or 2 test designs, we can do 1 or 2,000 and see how they would work in the real world, right? I don't know if you guys are big Formula One fans. I've got my McLaren hat here, powered by Alteryx, of course. But they have digital representations of their cars, and they have for years, right? But wind tunnel time, if you guys aren't Formula One fans, is it's regulated. You can only have a certain amount of simulation time, and so it's not like we can do a simulation now and we couldn't in the past. We could always do it. You can just do so much more in that window with your allotted time now, and you may not need to physically put a car in a wind tunnel to do computational fluid dynamics. You can just do it digitally. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, it's changed in a whole bunch of ways.
Yeah, definitely. I think Anna did mention it helped her, and that was a useful one. And even for you, Monica, I think that was a very cool example. Good explanation around, obviously the synthetic data and much more. All right. One quick question here that we have for. Let me pick. There's a lot of questions. So I'm just picking trying to just go through the line. So George Wilkin is here. Hey George. So how can companies include solutions such as ChatGPT into their Alteryx workflows? Anyone can answer here. I think you all three are experts. Yeah. Awesome. Monica.
I got it. So I have the wonderful job of knowing what is coming down the pipe for Alteryx and all the wonderful things that are coming out. So right now in our Alteryx Analytics Cloud, we have in Auto Insights Magic Documents, which already has generative AI embedded into it, as I was talking about. It has the functionality to create emails and PowerPoints automatically for you from already automatic analytic reports. Is absolutely wonderful. If you're already an Alteryx Auto Insights user, please go check it out. It's amazing. It's already available within the licenses that people already have. We also have workflow summary. It is, if you have an Alteryx Designer license, you can go into Alteryx community and get the tool, and you're able to basically install it, configure it, and ready to use. What workflow summary does is that it takes your workflow and it summarizes what it does. So when we're talking about, for example, analytics governance, and you're talking about like, hey, can you explain what this does, and what are the results and where it's coming in? Workflow summary does that for you. So let's say somebody creates a workflow and you're sharing it with a colleague, or somebody leaves a company and somebody else is taking over the work. They're able to use workflow summary to basically take that work and be ready to use it because it explains it for you. Then we just yesterday released our OpenAI connector. So basically you have the OpenAI API ready to use within Alteryx, and you're ready to use it. Now, because I have this wonderful job, there are much more things coming into the pipe. Please take a look out of all of the wonderful things that are coming along. We're going to be making announcements later this year with more generative AI features and maybe more.
Awesome. So, and if they need any secrets, or should they just reach out to you, Monica? I'm pretty sure you'll be happy to give them some background and for some secrets out there.
Absolutely. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Very happy to help you. And if I don't have the answer, I'll connect you with somebody who does.
That's very cool of you.
So can I add to that?
Yeah.
I was just going to say,
please.
you can even do it. I'll give everybody a lazy developer tip, but you can even ask ChatGPT to create workflows for you or write Alteryx formulas for you. So I've got a library of these examples where I say, okay, build me an Alteryx download tool formula that connects to Google Maps, accepts a street address, and translates it into a lat long, and it'll write the script for you. And you can just copy and paste it back. And obviously you can, now that you have an OpenAI connector, you can do that right in your workflow. So it could be this very dynamic thing that kind of builds itself in the workflow. So anyway, lots of ways to do it.
Yeah,
that's very cool. That's pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. One quick question here for Ira. So Ira, in terms of obviously you are in Alteryx out there. So could you elaborate on how Alteryx Auto Insights has impacted decision-making processes at Fidelity International, and what benefits or improvements have been observed as a result? Like, if you can share some thoughts around, would be interesting for our audience.
I can speak more to some of my previous clients. So for instance, one of the big deployments we did with Auto Insights, essentially when it first kind of came out, was with Kingfisher. They're a very large UK retailer. If you've heard of Screwfix or Brico Depot or B&Q, any of those, they're all under the umbrella of Kingfisher. And essentially, I mean, I've been working with them for the best part of a year with standard Alteryx Designer, essentially, cleaning up their people analytics data and getting it into shape with them. So when Auto Insights came out, it was such a great opportunity to kind of solve one of our key issues we had. And well, it was kind of a complex issue. So we had multiple dashboards which showed things like these were all people metrics. There was stuff like time to hire for recruitment, attrition in terms of employee turnover. For regulatory reporting, we had stuff like the gender pay gap. All of these metrics, and what essentially the leadership team were having the issue with was we had these kind of self-service dashboards where they would go to the dashboard and they would see these metrics and they would have all the filters and graphs and things, but often what would happen is they'd see the number has gone up and they would say, you know, what's caused this? And they would have to flick through the filters, they'd have to scroll around. It was a time-consuming process, and often the dashboard couldn't answer the question adequately. So what Auto Insights kind of, when we leveraged it, allowed us to do was essentially solve that issue in the sense of it would allow an analytics individual, a person in people analytics, to go to it, or one of the leadership team, and you know they could select 2 periods. So, for instance, last month and the year before, choose a KPI, be that attrition or the gender pay gap, and it would give them automatic key factor analysis. What has changed between these 2 periods? So what I'm talking about there is you could break down, for instance, something like attrition to a million different levels, especially with a big company like that. You could have a look at it in terms of attrition, in terms of length of service, attrition in terms of where they are regionally, what is their demographic data, there's a million different aspects to someone leaving a company. So what Auto Insights allowed them to see was what were the key aspects? Was it a certain region? Was it a certain function? Answer those kind of questions instantly. And also, just to kind of just nail the point down, something like attrition is quite a complex metric when you look at it. There's 2 aspects to it. The same with the gender pay gap. With the gender pay gap, you've got male pay, female pay. With attrition, you've got head count, you've got levers. Both these numbers can go up and down independently. Doing a kind of analysis whereby what were the key factors affecting each of these individually, and then as a whole, what was the biggest impacting features? It's not an easy piece of analysis to do every single month, comparing different dates dynamically, and building a story around that. So that's what Auto Insights allowed us to do. And it's just getting better and better with the generative AI, allowing us to essentially build a presentation around a metric instantly.
Super interesting. I think definitely you mentioned about obviously the external factors which can, obviously with the pandemic just a few years back, obviously the game might have changed completely. Now the insights that you kind of see are different, and what you might have expected would be different as well. So Alteryx Auto Insights definitely is a game changer out there. Chris, how do you look at it in terms of, obviously when you kind of, look at generative AI, obviously impacting Converge, and what type of, obviously market trends that you have seen, or, what type of challenges you've seen with customers, but not only just that, obviously while delivering those, specific things that the customers are expecting when generative AI kind of comes into the play. What are the typical challenges, and how do you look at Auto Insights, Alteryx Auto Insights to solve that for you?
Yeah, it's a super powerful tool for us in that it allows us to prove an idea faster than ever before, right? It doesn't take somebody sitting there dragging and dropping and building a dashboard and saying, hey, does this look like what you're expecting? And they say, no, I'm interested in something else. That we lost, thankfully, is that whole interaction between a business user trying to explain what matters most to them and a developer who doesn't live in a line of business, right? They don't speak that business language. So now having a powerful tool like Auto Insights can say, here are the salient data points or KPIs or metrics or whatever that you should be looking at. And, obvious challenges around that. If you're telling somebody who's been working in a role for 30 years, actually whatever you're measuring just statistically isn't significant. There's more important things you should have your eye on. That takes high EQ. We have to balance their gut feel and instinct and experience with, what these models are telling them. And so back to that whole blend of human insight and interaction and what the models are telling us, you have to find a way for those two things to not just coexist, but to complement each other. So that's a big challenge. We can build the best models in the world, and Auto Insights can generate, the most exciting thing you've ever seen. But if somebody culturally doesn't accept it or understand it or feels threatened by it, it won't go anywhere. It will die, just like every data warehouse or every BI project or dashboard that died over the last 15 years, right? Because people don't understand how to use it, they don't embrace it, maybe they don't trust it. So we really have to, it's the explainability factor of generative AI and saying, how did we even come up with this? Let's show you, let's show our math, right? And how we got there. So that's always a big challenge.
Yeah, for sure. I think those are pretty interesting points. Thanks for sharing those, Chris. One quick question here. And I think, Monica, you might be very interested in this one from Ryan. So what is your prediction regarding business leadership implementing Gen AI on a large scale for decision making and generating long-term strategic plans? I'm pretty sure, Monica, you get this question a lot, or maybe you might be dealing with companies, obviously, who are wanting to implement even the business leadership and wanting to work around the enterprise data. So how do you look at it?
Yes. So I feel like generative AI right now, we're kind of like in the starting stage of general use. So like, everyday people like, analysts and, like, for example, myself, I even use it for like my everyday job. And, I'm careful about what I put out there, but usually what I do doesn't really deal with sensitive data. It doesn't really deal with like much of IP, especially because, I'm about to do a LinkedIn post, for example. That is where we're getting a lot of adoption, especially with the general audience. When you're trying to implement it in an enterprise, especially when we're talking about, like regulated industries like Fidelity, right? It's like you have regulations, you have, a lot of things to like deal with in terms of like, how are you dealing with the data? How are you dealing like with the processes? Like, what Chris was talking about, like explainability, but on top of that, also transparency, right?
Right.
So when we're talking about, we have two different ways of thinking about it, depending on who the leader is. You have the CEO who wants to increase, revenue. Let's talk about, like making this innovative. Like I really want to push it. There's this pressure in the market of cost opportunity where you want to be ahead of your competition. However, when you try to implement it and you're a CDAO and you're a CIO, you're like, wait a minute, give me a second. Because yes, amazing idea, generative AI, but there's like so much complexity underneath it, right? With a CDAO, you have to think about the explainability, the bias, making sure that, everything's fact checked, that there's no hallucinations, that if you're dealing with analytics, that it's able to process the data within it and be able to interpret it correctly. When you're talking to the CIO, you're talking about like, where's the data coming from? Where's it going? You're talking about security. Are we talking about like, any kind of like IP? Does it work with my environment in terms of like within our tech stack? Does it fit? Like, do we have any risk of data leakage, right? So like, there's so much in terms of how you're going to be dealing with this new technology. On one hand is if you don't adopt AI in general, like right now we have generative AI specifically as an example, but AI overall technology, you're going to lose to your competitors, because if they're doing it, they're going to have the upper hand in productivity, innovation. When you're dealing with like personalization, segmentations, you're like, really talking to your audience and you're giving them the best of the world. But then if you don't implement it correctly, you're gonna have a lot of risk on the other side, right? So you have to balance both of those things. Now, of course, at Alteryx, we're very taking this really top of mind. How are we going to build these features within the environment that already exists with the guardrails so it actually works for your business, right? Because if you're talking to general use, here and there, who cares sometimes. You have to be careful anyways as a person. But when you're talking about enterprise and you're talking about the data of your customers, your own data, you're talking about proprietary data, it's super important to make sure that when you're applying it with all of these checks and governance and making sure that everything fits. So you're gonna see a lot of people in the market applying generative AI. Make sure that when you're looking, of course, Alteryx within other vendors, that they're actually, taking in consideration all these little pieces in terms of layers of complexity that it is when you're applying it to an enterprise level, that not only, it will affect your company, but it also affects the customers and people and third parties, because all the things that you do can have ramifications, especially when you're dealing with large companies at large scale, right? We want to make sure that everything's correct. One of the really big things that I have for recommendations for leaders is to make sure that you're attending summits, especially when you're talking about ethics in AI. Talk with other CEOs. How are they, applying things? Other CIOs, making sure that the governance levels that they're using, that you're sharing that, with the context of keeping a competitive advantage, but sharing best practices with each other. And then another one is check with your legal team as well, right? As hey, are we doing this correctly? Your InfoSec team, is your data correct? Let's establish processes to keep on checking this new technology. And personally, I think is absolutely wonderful. And you have to have caution, but making sure that the caution and the fear does not interfere with innovation.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Very cool, Monica. This also, kind of obviously you spoke a little about data governance at the same time, and the general bit about governance, and these leaders also, or generally as well, folks should be attending those summits and you talking to each other to understand, because I feel even if we take an example of EU, obviously the governance, the generative AI game, the data sharing altogether is very different out there, and they have specifically different rules how they kind of work around generative AI. So it's always good to talk more and obviously see how things are kind of moving. But good insights on the implementation in the with the data leaders as well. Chris, I have one quick question here from audience, since obviously you work as a CTO. So does any one of you have used generative AI on custom data, for example, to make L1, L2 support team more efficient by creating an AI bot for them by using the existing resolved historical tickets database? This may be a game changer and big cost saver on support front of any project. Chris, what do you think?
Oh yeah, and I think this is a bit of a leading question, but I think this is where you start. You start focused and small. These are, like I said before, small language models, right? So, I won't name the client, but got 1 million help desk tickets a year, and that takes a lot of human intervention, right? Some of them say, "I forgot my password." Some of them are more complex. You've got so much of this historical data, and then you've got the action that a human took. So it says, what steps did I take to resolve this ticket? You can automate. This is 80-20 kind of thing, right? You could automate a whole slice of the easy ones that say, I need Word. And you could just automatically, with the power of things like RPA or robotic process automation, you can have Word automatically installed on their desktops. So yes, that first layers, whether that's a call center or a help desk, or internal IT support, all of that is, you've got enough data to go and train those models. So absolutely a game changer. One of these bots can take all of the easy tasks, and you can focus all your existing analysts on the more complex ones.
Awesome, Chris. Thanks for sharing that. A quick question for you. With the increasing use of AI and generative AI in data and analytics, what measures can businesses take to ensure the privacy and security of sensitive data?
And that was to me, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
Ira.
Great.
Right.
Yeah, in terms of privacy and sensitivity of data, I suppose the key aspect is to understand the tool that you're using. ChatGPT, for instance, as I previously mentioned, had the potential to leak data back to end users. So information that you gave it was being released to the public. So yeah, if you're developing an on-prem kind of build, then you can build those securities yourself. But if you're using an external tool, make sure to check what you're signing up for. I know that, for instance, internally, a lot of companies aren't allowing tools like ChatGPT just for everyone for that reason. It's still very much early days on a lot of these tools. So maybe I think a good strategy is to keep it for a select few for the time being. Keep it in a sandbox till you're very certain you know what you're dealing with. I think that's a general rule of thumb with these things.
Okay. Anyone? Any else? Yeah, Monica.
So one of the things that I have seen in the market, and something that we're thinking about it too, is that companies are building their own LLM models within a workbench, or that they're working very closely with a partner to make sure that that LLM basically is contained, right? So you train it with your own data, you train it within a firewall, and making sure that none of that information comes out. As Ira was talking about, especially if you are just getting into it, it's like, hey, use synthetic data, use data that is like not sensitive. But if you have to use it, especially like privacy, security, like sensitive type of data, that is where you use a sandbox to test it out first, making sure that it's in an isolated environment, making, what are the fact checks, making sure that you have a whole entire governance team as part of it, right? And then when you're ready to push it into production, making sure that all the checkpoints of that governance comply within the policies that the company has, and also that are part of the regulations and laws of the specific country that you're at. So there are going to be different, requirements for example, global companies that have to adhere to the highest standard of the strictest of companies. But then there are other companies that just apply it within their own countries, and the regulations might change. So making sure that you're compliant at all times as part of it within your governance platform.
Yeah. I'll add to that and just say for everybody listening in, go read up on the concept of walled gardens. So this is, having these models trained specifically inside of your organization, inside of your walls with your data. It's very different than what we're reading about with a bunch of these public models.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for those insights. I think we are almost time, but we have so many questions. I know we can't get through all of them, but I'm pretty sure our guests, when they get time, they might go back and share their thoughts in comments. So one last question that I will actually pick from the audience itself. All right, this one from YouTube. So one concern with generative AI is its potential for biased outputs. How can businesses address and mitigate bias in generative AI models to ensure ethical and fair outcomes? What are your thoughts, Ira?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, you can apply similar processes that you do with standard ML models. It really comes down to the data sets you're using and establishing is there bias within them. That can be quite an interesting task. So, for instance, I remember reading a case with essentially analyzing CVs, and essentially it was figuring out whether there was a gender bias in terms of the way the model was, assigning it as a good CV or a bad CV, because the data coming in was potentially for maybe a more male-dominated role. So a lot of the CVs that would be seeing would maybe be male, and it's not as simple as making sure that you remove he and him and her from the data. There's a whole process you have to build whereby, for instance, males may typically do different sports to females, which may also be on the CV, and the model could infer gender from that and then introduce that bias back into the system because the data itself was biased towards males. So it's you have to kind of look at the data coming in, measure the results, and see whether it's see whether there is that kind of potential thing being introduced. So yeah, it's just kind of measuring input, output, making sure the data is clean.
Yeah, good.
We all know where that story. I don't know if you know where that case study came from. It's one of the biggest companies on the planet. So yes, they had to figure that out quickly.
Yeah.
Which one? I can't remember from memory.
I don't know. It rhymes with Schmamazon. Yeah. Yeah. But and then don't forget about the human element too here, right? Like Ira said, we can manage this stuff the way we always have. So RLHF, or reinforcement learning through human feedback, means humans can actually watch the outputs and say, nope, this is biased, or this is inappropriate content or whatever. And you can weight that human feedback very heavily in these neural networks. And so they learn that they are rewarded or punished for biased decisions. And you can see the parameters that used to do that. So humans still have a very important role in this.
Exactly. And that's what I always tell people, that why do you think AI will ever replace you? It can't. So forget about that.
So I'm actually going to take it a little bit further. So, you have, you're going to need high quality data, strong governance practices, continuous improvement, human in the loop. Those are basically table stakes at this point in terms of like keeping, bias, not only in generative AI, but all of AI. I want to go further than that and say that there are companies and third parties out there that not only help you like build better products and build better data practices, but actually help you with bias throughout your company practices and policies, right? I think that when we're talking about bias and discrimination, we're dealing with a much larger problem than just with AI. This has to come from the top. It has to permeate every single layer within an enterprise. It has to be part of the policies. It has to be part of the best practices. It has to be part of hiring practices and the culture. So, ultimately what we build as a enterprise, as a company, it is a reflection of who we are as people, because we are the ones inputting the data, we're the ones creating the systems, we are the ones making decisions out of the data, right? So the thought process of, hey, bad data in, bad data out, when we're talking about that and you abstract that layer into like that higher level, is when you have really good cultural practices within your company and you hold yourself to like that type of accountability within bias and discrimination within every single part of your company, the chances of you getting to the other side when we're talking about AI, your risk decreases a lot lower, because you're already dealing with best practices in your everyday life, how you treat your coworkers, the way that you treat the data, and you're also training yourself as a person to identify when something is biased, when something is discriminatory, because it becomes part of the culture of the company itself. So let's go even further and not just think about the machines, but think about us as people and as a cultural system within a company and an enterprise.
Yeah. No, I think those are very good points, Monica, and thanks for sharing those in detail. Thanks, Chris, Ira. This was the last question, but we don't end it here. Obviously, I'm pretty sure our audience have a lot of questions for you, and since we can't take it all, they would love to reach out to you. So where can they reach out? Ira, if folks need to reach out to you, what's the best place?
Oh gosh, we're always happy to message on LinkedIn, or even better, the Alteryx community. Yeah, you'll get brownie points if you message me there. So yeah.
Awesome. What about you, Chris?
Yep, likewise to the fellow Mavericks out there. The Alteryx community is great. LinkedIn, I try to be as responsive as I can. And if you have any questions, they can throw them in this thread as well. And I'll try and go through and put some of this stuff on permanent record. So yeah, looking forward to chatting with everybody. This is great.
Yeah,
That
really
sounds
enjoyed
like
it.
a plan. Monica?
Okay.
LinkedIn?
I'm in LinkedIn. I recently opened Threads too, so I'll put that out
Oh,
there
wow.
as well.
Wow.
And email, LinkedIn, and also in the Alteryx community. Very happy to do so. I have not received a single message on Alteryx community yet. So if you're the first person, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. So yeah, feel free to reach out to all our experts. Thanks again, Ira, Chris, Monica. This was amazing. I think we obviously should do a 2.0 session maybe after 6 months, 7 months, when we are, more into the game of generative AI. Things might have, obviously things are evolving very quickly. Like every day I wake up to another news around generative AI or some acquisition that's happening, and things are moving pretty quick. So it would be good to obviously connect back and have this type of fun session again. Thank you again. Yeah,
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time, Ravit. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
awesome. Thank you, everyone.
you.
Thanks everyone for joining us.